Let's begin here because too many people confuse attraction with love. A smile, a glance, a compliment. These can feel powerful, but they belong to the surface. They stir the senses, yet they tell us nothing about the soul's intention. Real love does not declare itself with fireworks. It reveals itself in quiet, persistent signals, often disguised as simple questions. And here is the great misunderstanding. Most women hear these questions, but dismiss them as small talk. They believe he is filling silence or being polite, when in truth, he is offering a glimpse into his hidden world. If you can recognize the difference, you step into a doorway. Few notice an opening into the depth of his psyche. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now think of the way Jung described the persona, the mask we show to the world. In early romance, the persona is busy charming, flattering, and playing roles meant to impress. But behind that mask is the shadow, the part of the self that fears rejection, that longs for safety, that craves true belonging. When a man begins to ask certain questions, he is momentarily setting aside the mask. He is testing whether it is safe to show his unguarded self. This is not lust speaking. This is the first stirring of individuation in love, the desire to move beyond fleeting pleasure toward authentic union. Too many still measure love by gestures that can be staged gifts, compliments, or even grand promises. But those who have lived long enough know better. A gift can be purchased. A promise can be broken. A charm can be worn like a costume. What cannot be faked is the subtle shift of attention. It is the way his questions begin to stretch beyond the moment. He no longer speaks only of tonight's plans or next week's outing. He reaches into the future, searching for resonance, asking if your path and his might walk in the same direction. This is the threshold where love begins. It does not announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly through curiosity that carries weight, through questions that reveal more than he intends. And in those questions, the unconscious whispers, "I see you not only as you are today, but as someone I may walk beside tomorrow." That is the foundation we must recognize. Love is not born in words of admiration, but in the courage to imagine a shared life. And when that courage rises to the surface, it often sounds deceptively simple. 3 questions asked without fanfare, yet charged with meaning. To miss them is to miss the true beginning of love's story. There is always a moment when the surface begins to crack. It may not look dramatic to the eye, but to the soul, it feels like a shift in the ground beneath your feet. The words seem casual, the tone almost ordinary, yet something deep is revealed. A question falls into the silence, and if you are listening, you realize it is not just a question. It is the first sign that attraction alone cannot hold. For many, this moment is missed. A woman hears a man ask about her dreams or where she imagines herself in the years to come, and she answers quickly, thinking it is only small talk. She does not sense the depth beneath the surface. She continues to believe the present moment is all there is, that desire is measured by gestures or by charm. But beneath that exchange, something essential has been placed on the table. The fracture is subtle, but it changes everything. Why is it missed so often? because we have been trained to listen only for what is loud. We expect declarations, dramatic promises, or confessions that make the heart race. But love begins differently. Jung observed that the unconscious speaks in whispers, in slips of language, in symbols that are easily overlooked. In the same way, a man's soul reveals itself in questions that do not match the script of casual desire. These are not words of performance, but the first signals of the deeper self reaching for connection. Think of it as a lantern suddenly lit in a darkened corridor. For a moment, the light touches corners you had not noticed. Yet if your eyes are fixed elsewhere, you will miss it. You will keep walking as though nothing happened. That is the tragedy of many relationships. The fracture appears, the deeper opening is offered, but it is ignored. The first fracture lies between the old pattern and the new invitation. The old pattern says, remain in the present. Enjoy what is here. Do not ask for more. The new invitation says, imagine with me, stretch into the future, risk believing in continuity. Between these two voices lies a tension that determines whether the bond deepens or fades. A woman who has been wounded may mistrust such questions. When asked about her future, she may fear it is a trap, another man pretending to care, her shadow. The place where past disappointments and betrayals live whispers that it is safer to dismiss him. She may answer vaguely, holding back, protecting herself from being seen too clearly. And in doing so, she unknowingly closes the door that had been opening. This is the cost of not recognizing the moment. We can see the fracture more clearly if we look at what is happening within the man. Attraction alone requires no courage. Desire for the present asks nothing more than appetite. But to ask about a future is to reveal vulnerability. He is exposing that he is not content to remain at the surface. His persona, the mask of self-sufficiency, the mask of control, is giving way to something more fragile. He is admitting, even without awareness, that he is already seeing her in the story of his own life. This is where the shadow rises for him as well. For in asking such questions, he risks rejection on a deeper plane. If she dismisses him, it is not only his charm that is turned aside, but his longing for permanence. That wound cuts closer to the core. This is why such moments are charged with tension. The fracture opens both possibilities, the building of a bridge or the return to isolation. It is important to understand that the fracture is not only between two people. It is within each of us. A woman may sense the stirrings of something real, yet part of her resists. She wants love, but fears its demands. She craves intimacy, yet dreads the loss of control. Her inner voices argue, one urging her to trust, the other warning her to retreat. This inner split is the true fracture, the distance between the self that longs to grow and the persona that prefers safety. Jung spoke often of the danger of staying bound to the persona. When we cling too tightly to our mask, we avoid the risk of intimacy, but we also avoid transformation. We remain locked in roles, repeating old patterns, never stepping into the deeper waters of life. The fracture comes as an invitation to step beyond the mask, to risk showing who we truly are. And in relationships, this risk begins with how we answer these deceptively simple questions. Imagine two paths diverging. On one path, the question is brushed aside. The conversation drifts back to safe topics, the connection remains shallow, and eventually the bond withers. On the other path, the question is received as the gift it is. The woman pauses, breathes, and answers with honesty, even if her answer is imperfect. In that moment, something shifts. The fracture becomes a doorway. The bond takes on weight, substance, direction. But here is where we must be honest. Most choose the safer path. Most retreat into vagueness, offering polite words instead of truth. This is not because they lack feeling, but because they fear the consequence of naming it. The shadow whispers, "If I reveal my real hopes, I may be disappointed. If I tell the truth, I may scare him away." So they remain silent, or offer diluted versions of themselves. And with each vague answer, the unconscious bond begins to fade. This is the wound of modern love. We crave depth, yet fear its cost. We hunger for permanence, yet retreat into temporary comfort. The fracture reveals this paradox with brutal clarity. We stand at the threshold of love, yet many turn back unwilling to risk vulnerability. And so the lesson of the first fracture is not about him alone. It is about us. Are we willing to recognize the invitation when it comes disguised as a question? Are we willing to pause to hear the weight beneath the words and to answer with authenticity? If not, the unconscious bond cannot take root. The seed remains ungerminated. For those who have lived many seasons, the truth becomes clear. Grand gestures may impress, but they do not endure. What matters are the quiet openings, the subtle shifts where the soul reaches out. These are the moments where love either takes form or fades into shadow. To ignore them is to stay bound to repetition. To recognize them is to step onto the path of individuation, where love becomes not just attraction, but transformation. The first fracture, then, is not a breaking apart, but a breaking open. It is the moment where the soul of another brushes against our own, offering a glimpse of something larger than the present. Whether we step into it or turn away defines the story that follows. And so we must learn to listen differently. Not with ears trained only for surface charm, but with awareness tuned to the unconscious. When he asks about your future, he is revealing his. When he asks what you feel, he is testing if it is safe to reveal his own. When he asks about your well-being, he is exposing that your life already touches his. These are not fractures that destroy, but fractures that reveal the depth waiting beneath. To see them clearly requires courage. Courage to set aside cynicism. Courage to resist the persona that says, "Stay safe, stay hidden." The true self knows that love cannot flourish without risk. It knows that the fracture is not the end, but the beginning. This is where our story now stands, at the moment where attraction is no longer enough, where the surface begins to break, and the unconscious stirs with its deeper invitation. What happens next depends entirely on whether we dare to meet that invitation with truth. Every bond eventually arrives at the place where masks are tested. At first, the persona feels safe, well-dressed, polite, perfectly arranged. It plays the role of charm, of competence, of composure. Yet love does not flourish in masks. Sooner or later, the unconscious calls for something deeper, and the shadow enters the scene. The shadow in relationship is not evil. It is simply what has been hidden, what has been judged unacceptable, what we fear might drive others away. In men, the shadow often hides vulnerability, fear of rejection, and longing for reassurance. In women, it may hide anger at being unseen, doubt about self-worth, or fear of repeating old disappointments. When these shadows rise, the persona begins to crack, and the real struggle begins. This is why questions of love often sound so simple, yet carry such weight. When he asks, "What do you feel for me?" the persona trembles. His lifelong armor, his training to be strong, stoic, and untouchable, suddenly feels thin. He risks exposing his shadow, which whispers of need and dependency emotions he has been taught to conceal. For him, that question is not casual curiosity. It is a battle between his mask of control and his true longing for connection. The same is true for her. When faced with his question, she too is confronted with her own mask. She may wish to remain mysterious, to keep the safety of distance, to answer with polite words that reveal nothing. Her persona whispers, "Do not say too much. Do not show too much. Protect yourself." Yet, her deeper self knows that avoidance carries its own cost. In silence, intimacy dies. In evasion, trust collapses. This is the tension between shadow and persona. The mask seeks safety. The shadow seeks release. Love requires that both be acknowledged, but neither can dominate. If the persona wins, the relationship remains shallow-bound to performance and appearances. If the shadow overwhelms without consciousness, chaos follows neediness, projection, and fear. The task is integration, where the shadow is met with compassion, and the persona is softened enough to let the truth come through. Jung reminded us that what we resist in the other often mirrors what we resist in ourselves. A woman who recoils from his vulnerability may carry a hidden fear of her own. She may believe that showing need is weakness because she has never made peace with that part of her own shadow. A man who avoids her truth may do so because he has not yet faced his fear of inadequacy. Each accuses the other of flaws, but in reality, each is staring into a mirror held up by the unconscious. This mirroring can be unsettling. It is far easier to admire a mask than to sit with a shadow. Yet the truth is plain. The persona cannot hold intimacy. Masks grow heavy. Eventually they slip. What remains is whatever has been hidden, waiting to be acknowledged. Love asks for this confrontation, though most resist it. Consider the subtle costs of remaining in the mask. When she answers vaguely, he hears only surface. His longing for depth goes unmet, and he slowly retreats, even if his body remains present. When he avoids her questions, she feels unseen, and her own shadow of rejection awakens. They speak, they smile, but underneath grows an emptiness, a quiet erosion of trust. The persona performs, but the soul is absent. The shadow must be met for love to grow. Yet meeting the shadow requires courage. It means admitting feelings that do not match the mask, fear, desire, longing, hurt. It means letting the other see the cracks, trusting they will not use those cracks to wound. For many, this is the hardest task of all. They can share laughter plans, even physical closeness, but not their shadow. Without it, the bond remains partial. In this struggle, we see the archetypal drama of love itself, too. Selves seeking to meet beyond masks. Individuation, Jung said, is not only a solitary path, but also a relational one. In the mirror of the beloved, the unconscious rises. Old wounds reappear, hidden fears surface, and we are asked to integrate them rather than deny them. The shadow is not an enemy here. It is the doorway. We must pause here to notice the paradox. Many fear that revealing their shadow will drive love away. They hide thinking secrecy preserves connection. Yet the opposite is true. The more one hides, the less real the bond becomes. Only when the shadow is shared does intimacy gain depth. True closeness is born in the places we most want to conceal. This is why a simple question can feel so terrifying. What do you feel for me carries the weight of centuries of conditioning. It asks her to set aside the persona of mystery and name something vulnerable. It asks him to set aside the persona of strength and risk rejection. Both stand at the edge of a symbolic abyss. If I show myself, will I still be loved? Here love becomes a crucible. The persona burns, the shadow emerges, and the self must decide whether to step forward. Some will retreat, unable to bear the heat. They will say the timing is wrong, or the question is unfair, or the feelings are unclear. But beneath those explanations lies fear. Fear of being known. Fear of being hurt. Fear of losing control. Others, though trembling, will step through. They will name their feelings, admit their doubts, expose their needs. And in that moment, the bond either deepens into truth or ends with dignity. This is the trial every meaningful relationship must endure. The persona may open the door, but only the shadow can cross the threshold. Without this crossing, no true union takes place. The cost of avoidance is always repetition. Repeating surface connections. Repeating shallow bonds. Repeating the loneliness of never being seen. For older souls, this truth becomes undeniable. Time itself demands honesty. To continue wearing masks is exhausting. To continue avoiding the shadow is to remain in cycles that bring no peace. The gift of maturity is clarity. The recognition that only authenticity can sustain love. And authenticity requires the shadow's inclusion. We should not fear this process. The shadow, once faced, becomes a source of strength. The man who admits his vulnerability no longer needs to defend it with bravado. The woman who admits her doubts no longer wastes energy pretending to be invulnerable. In the act of sharing, the burden lightens. The shadow loses its power to sabotage because it has been brought into light. This is individuation within love, the integration of mask and truth, of persona and shadow. It is not about perfection or the absence of fear. It is about courage to show up as whole, to bring both light and darkness to the table. When both partners dare to do this, the relationship becomes a vessel of transformation. It becomes not just companionship, but a path toward wholeness. So we return to the simple yet profound reality. Questions reveal more than answers. A man who asks about your feelings is exposing his shadow. How you respond reveals yours. In that moment, two personas may collide or two shadows may meet. If both choose honesty, something sacred begins. If either retreats into masks, the moment passes, leaving silence where connection might have been. This is the heart of the third stage, the confrontation of shadow and persona. It is the moment where attraction becomes tested, where the possibility of depth is weighed against the comfort of performance. And in this moment, each must choose whether to remain hidden or to step into the light. Love in the Jungian sense is never about masks alone. It is the meeting of whole selves, shadows included. And until we recognize this, we will continue to confuse performance with intimacy and desire with love. The task before us is simple, yet profound: to see through the mask, to welcome the shadow, and to allow love to be real. Every true turning point in love begins quietly, almost like dawn breaking after a long night. The questions that once seemed ordinary now reveal themselves as signals of something deeper. They are not simply words passing between two people. They are invitations, doorways into a shared reality. When recognized, they awaken a shift not only in the relationship, but also in the soul. To understand this awakening, we must remember that every human being carries within them two movements: the pull toward safety and the pull toward growth. Safety keeps us bound to the persona, repeating old roles and predictable exchanges. Growth, however, demands that we step into risk, into vulnerability, into the unknown territory where the shadow has been hidden. Love, in its mature form, asks us to choose growth. When a man asks, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" he is doing more than filling space in conversation. He is testing whether two futures can merge. He is activating the part of his psyche that projects forward, seeking coherence between his inner vision and the life of the one he loves. If she dismisses the question, the invitation closes. But if she answers with truth, her hopes, her fears, her desires, then the connection expands. The future becomes a shared landscape instead of two separate roads. This awakening is not only about him, it is about her as well. Many women, conditioned by past disappointments, answer vaguely out of caution. Yet in that caution, something essential is lost. Jung wrote that until the unconscious is made conscious, it directs our lives, and we call it fate. In this moment, fate shifts. By speaking openly of her authentic path, she claims authorship of her story. She signals that she is willing to be seen not as a mask, but as a whole person moving forward. The second question, "What do you feel for me?" is an even greater threshold. To answer with honesty is to step into a new dimension of intimacy. Here, the awakening is mutual. He reveals his fear of rejection. She reveals her fear of being too much or not enough. Both risk exposure, yet both discover that vulnerability is not weakness, but the very soil of real love. In the act of naming feelings, the shadow is not denied, but integrated. The mask of persona softens, and the deeper self begins to emerge. And then there are the small, persistent questions. Did you eat? Did you get home safely? How was your day? On the surface, they seem trivial, but when repeated with sincerity, they mark a profound awakening of care. They reveal that she is no longer confined to his moments of pleasure or his immediate world. She has entered the rhythm of his unconscious. She is thought of in absence carried in mind and heart throughout the day. This is no longer attraction. This is attachment, a weaving together of inner lives. Awakening often arrives like this in the subtle realization that what once felt ordinary is actually extraordinary. It is the moment when you recognize that his concern is not control, but care, that his curiosity is not small talk, but an opening of his inner map, that his vulnerability is not weakness, but courage. These recognitions transform how you see him, and more importantly, how you see yourself. Because in love, every question is also a mirror. When he asks about your future, he is also asking, can I imagine myself in it? When he asks about your feelings, he is really saying, am I worthy of being loved as I am? When he asks about your well-being, he is whispering, does your life matter to me beyond my own desires? To recognize this is to awaken to the truth that love is never about one person alone. It is about two selves seeking coherence, testing whether their inner worlds can align. In Jungian language, this is the beginning of individuation within relationship. Individuation does not mean isolation or selfishness. It means becoming whole, integrating both the persona and the shadow, so that what you bring to the relationship is authentic rather than performed. The questions of love are catalysts in this process. They draw the hidden into the open, and in doing so, they demand integration. Awakening also means recognizing projection. At the start of romance, each person sees the other through a veil of fantasy. The man projects his anima, the inner feminine image, onto the woman. She projects her animus, the inner masculine, onto him. These projections can be intoxicating, but they are not sustainable. Awakening comes when the projections begin to dissolve, when she no longer sees only her dream of a partner, and he no longer sees only his fantasy of completion. Instead, they begin to see each other as real, flawed, whole individuals. This is where love either falters or deepens. The questions act as dissolving agents for these projections. Where do you see yourself in 5 years cuts through fantasy by forcing her to reveal her actual vision. What do you feel for me pierces the illusion by demanding truth rather than assumption. Did you each shatters the distance between fantasy and daily life by insisting that care shows up in the ordinary. In these ways, the questions awaken a movement from dream to reality, from persona to self, from projection to authenticity. It is important to understand that awakening is not a single moment, but a series of recognitions. At first, it feels like discomfort. The questions stir anxiety resistance and even irritation. But beneath that resistance lies the soul's recognition that something real is happening. If embraced, the discomfort becomes revelation. If avoided, the moment passes and the chance for deeper connection fades. To awaken in love is to realize that intimacy is not built on performance, but on presence. It is to recognize that the shadow need not be hidden. that the persona need not dominate that vulnerability is not danger, but possibility. It is to see that these questions are not threats, but gifts that reveal the unconscious desire to merge two lives into a shared story. This awakening also carries responsibility. Once you see the depth behind the questions, you cannot return to pretending they mean nothing. You cannot dismiss them as casual. You must respond with the same authenticity they invite. For to ignore them after recognition is to betray not only him, but yourself. The unconscious has spoken, and you must decide whether to listen. In this way, awakening is both beautiful and unsettling. It shows you what is possible, but it also demands a choice. You can continue playing safe, or you can step into the vulnerability that love requires. Jung described individuation as the confrontation with the unconscious, the willingness to integrate what has been hidden. In love, this integration begins when you recognize the unconscious in another's questions and respond with the truth of your own. And so we see the meaning of awakening in relationship. It is not the sudden rush of passion, but the quiet recognition that what you are being asked is not trivial. It is a call to step out from behind the persona to meet the shadow with compassion and to allow love to unfold on deeper ground. It is the moment you realize that love is not given through words alone, but through courage, presence, and honesty. Awakening is the pivot point. Before it, love is performance and projection. After it, love becomes conscious, intentional, and capable of transformation. Those who recognize it find themselves on the threshold of true intimacy. Those who ignore it remain bound to the surface forever, confusing charm with love and safety with connection. The awakening asks only one thing: the courage to answer authentically, to speak of your real future rather than a rehearsed script, to name your feelings rather than hide them, to value his care as love rather than dismiss it as routine. In doing so, you meet not only the other, but yourself. You awaken not only to love, but to your own soul. Awakening alone is not enough. To recognize love's questions is only the first step. What follows is the harder task, deciding how to respond. A truth once seen cannot be unseen. The unconscious has revealed itself, and now comes the moment of choice. Every authentic relationship reaches this threshold. One cannot linger forever in recognition without action. To remain silent after awakening is to slip back into the safety of masks to let fear regain its rule. The call of individuation always demands a concrete response. Without it, transformation remains only a possibility, never a reality. Here lies the paradox of love. We desire deep connection, yet we hesitate when it is offered. We long for commitment, yet we shrink from the responsibility it demands. Jung observed that the self calls us toward wholeness, but the ego resists because wholeness requires surrender. In relationships, this surrender takes the form of boundaries and choices, saying yes to truth and no to illusion. Consider the question about the future. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? This is not answered with vague comfort if the connection is to survive. It requires a decision to speak from clarity. She may reveal her dreams, her goals, even her uncertainties, but she must speak them as they are. To answer honestly is to set a boundary. I will not live in shadows of pretense. I will build on truth or not at all. This act is not only about him, it is about her relationship to her own soul. For every vague answer given to protect another is also an act of betrayal against the self. By declaring her vision, she honors the archetype of the self, the inner compass that demands alignment between inner truth and outer life. This is individuation in practice. The same is true of the question about feelings. When asked, "What do you feel for me?" the easy path is to dodge, to soften, to hide. But transformation requires courage. To say, "I do feel something real," or even "I am still uncertain but willing to discover," is to step into authenticity. It creates a boundary against dishonesty. It declares, "I will not play games with my heart or with yours." This is the essence of love's boundary. It is not about control or restriction, but about integrity. A woman who honors her truth, even if it risks loss, is drawing a sacred line. She is saying, "I will not live on the surface. I will not settle for connection built on performance. My soul demands more." The small, daily questions: did you eat? Did you get home safely? Also demand a response. To dismiss them as routine is to shut the door on care. To recognize them as love in action is to reciprocate. A boundary is set here too. Love must be mutual. Care cannot flow one way only. To receive without giving is to unbalance the bond. But to respond with genuine gratitude and to mirror the concern is to declare, "I see you, I value you, and I choose to care for you as you care for me." Boundaries of this kind are transformative because they end the cycle of vagueness and fear. They draw a line between old patterns and new reality. Old patterns of hiding, avoiding, and protecting the persona are set aside. A new path opens one of clarity, honesty, and mutual recognition. This moment of choice always carries weight. Once she decides to answer truthfully, consequences unfold. Sometimes the relationship grows stronger, built on shared authenticity. Sometimes it ends revealing incompatibility. But either way, the act of choosing transforms her. She is no longer captive to silence. She has honored her soul. And this is the true meaning of boundary. It is not a wall to keep others out, but a declaration of what the self can no longer betray. It is a turning point where individuation shapes the course of love. For love without boundaries collapses into confusion, but love with boundaries becomes a vessel of transformation. Jung often spoke of the need to confront opposites and hold them together. Here, the opposites are clear: the comfort of safety versus the risk of truth. The persona whispers, "Stay silent. Avoid discomfort. Preserve harmony." The self whispers, "Speak risk and trust that only truth can sustain love." The boundary is the act of choosing the self over the mask. Many resist this choice because they fear loss. They believe honesty will drive the other away. Yet, the deeper truth is that dishonesty will erode the bond even faster. To remain vague may keep someone near, but it keeps them near to the mask, not to the real self. And such nearness is loneliness in disguise. To choose authenticity is to test love at its roots. If the connection cannot withstand truth, then it was never capable of depth. If it survives, it grows stronger, rooted not in illusion, but in reality. In either case, the choice frees the soul. The unconscious no longer needs to stage conflicts or create patterns of sabotage. The truth has been spoken, and with it comes release. We must remember that every transformation carries both loss and gain. To set a boundary is to risk losing the familiar, but it is also to gain alignment with the self. This is the deeper work of love, not to cling to what is safe, but to allow what is true to flourish. When two people both choose this path, their bond becomes a crucible. It refines them, burns away illusion, and reveals what is essential. Boundaries also protect against the misuse of care. As we saw, small questions of love can be mistaken for control. But by naming the difference by saying, "I value your care, but I will not live under domination," the boundary transforms suspicion into clarity. Control belongs to the persona's fear, but care belongs to the self's desire for connection. By drawing that line, love is purified. This stage of choice and boundary is therefore the turning point of the entire journey. It is where love ceases to be an unconscious projection and becomes a conscious decision. No longer is it sustained by fantasy or surface charm. It is tested in the fire of truth. And in that fire, either it endures or it dissolves. Either way, the soul grows. For those in the second half of life, this truth becomes especially urgent. Time no longer allows for endless repetition of surface games. The soul longs for authenticity, for companionship that nourishes rather than depletes. Boundaries become not only acts of courage, but acts of mercy. They save both partners from wasting years in illusions, guiding them toward either deeper union or necessary release. The gift of this stage is freedom. Freedom from masks, freedom from repetition, freedom from the fear that truth will destroy. In reality, only truth can sustain. Love that survives dishonesty is not love but dependency. Love that thrives in authenticity is the beginning of individuation shared. So the invitation of this stage is clear. When the questions arise about the future, about feelings, about daily care, respond with courage. Do not return to vague answers or evasions. Draw the boundary of truth. Say what is real. Accept the consequences. In doing so, you transform not only the relationship, but yourself. And this is the essence of transformation, to set aside the safety of masks and to step fully into the integrity of the self. To allow the shadow to be seen without shame and the persona to soften into authenticity. To choose love not as illusion, but as a conscious path. At the end of this journey, we return to the simplest truth. Love is not revealed in dramatic gestures or flawless masks. It is shown in quiet questions, in consistent care, in the courage to be seen. These are the moments where the unconscious breaks through the surface and invites us into depth. If we are awake enough to notice, we step into love as it truly is raw, vulnerable, and transformative. The path we have followed reveals a rhythm. First comes attraction, the spark that stirs the senses but remains shallow. Then comes fracture, when the surface no longer holds and the unconscious begins to press forward. Then the shadow appears, meeting the persona in its fragile disguise. Awakening follows as we realize that what we once thought was casual is in truth an invitation to the soul. Then comes choice, where courage is demanded, where boundaries are drawn, where truth replaces illusion. And now we arrive at closure, not as an ending, but as integration, where all of these movements are brought together into meaning. What then is the meaning? It is that love is never a passive feeling to be waited on, but a conscious act to be chosen. It is not sustained by charm, by fantasy, or by words alone. It endures because two people dare to show both their persona and their shadow, and to hold each other in that wholeness. This is the individuation of relationship, the merging of authenticity and care, of vulnerability and strength, of the everyday and the eternal. We must remember that many lose love not because it was absent, but because they failed to recognize it. They dismissed the quiet questions as routine. They avoided the honest answers out of fear. They chose silence instead of truth, persona instead of self. And in doing so, they turned away from the very transformation their soul longed for. But there is hope. Every new encounter is another chance to listen differently. Every relationship, whether long-lasting or fleeting, carries within it the possibility of awakening. The key is recognition, to hear what is truly being asked, to answer with integrity, to see the small acts of care as signs of love in development, to honor the courage it takes to ask, and to meet that courage with honesty of your own. The lesson is simple, though never easy. Authenticity is the foundation of lasting connection. To answer falsely is to build on sand. To answer truly is to build on rock. Even if the rock reveals that paths diverge, it is better to walk in truth than to remain trapped in illusion. For the soul cannot thrive in falsehood. It longs for coherence between inner reality and outer life. Jung often reminded us that the self speaks through symbols, through whispers, through the quiet movements of the unconscious. Love works in the same way. It does not always announce itself with certainty. It approaches through subtle openings. A question about the future, a request for your feelings, a consistent concern for your well-being. These are the symbols of love in its authentic form. To honor them is to align yourself with the deeper currents of life. And so we close with this reflection. Mature love is not given to the impatient or the evasive. It belongs to those who have the courage to step beyond masks, to embrace vulnerability, and to speak truth even when it shakes. It is for those who can distinguish between control and care, between performance and presence, between fantasy and reality. If you carry one lesson from these reflections, let it be this: when love comes quietly in the form of simple questions, do not dismiss it. Do not retreat. into silence. Meet it with clarity, with gratitude, with the fullness of who you are. In that moment, you honor not only the other person, but also your own soul. The journey of love, like the journey of individuation, is never about perfection. It is about wholeness. It is about living so honestly that nothing remains hidden, so courageously that nothing remains unspoken, so compassionately that even the shadow finds a place at the table. In this way, love becomes not a fleeting passion, but a path of transformation, a path that carries us closer to the truth of who we are. And so I leave you with this image: love as a quiet flame, not a blaze that burns out quickly, but a steady light that grows brighter when it is tended with honesty and care. Each question is like a spark added to that flame. Each answer of truth is like the breath that keeps it alive. And when both choose to tend it, the flame becomes a beacon, guiding two souls toward wholeness, illuminating the path of a shared life. Before we part, take a moment to reflect. Which part of these reflections speaks most deeply to your own life? Is it the courage to answer truthfully, the willingness to set boundaries, or the recognition of small acts of care as signs of love? Share your thoughts in the comments and let your reflection become part of a larger conversation. And if these words have spoken to you, remember to like and subscribe so that together we can continue exploring the wisdom of Jung and the deeper truths of the soul.